everyone, JG here, and welcome back to our Kerbal Space Program colonization playthrough. Today we're going to be exploring the moon, Apollo style, with some awesome parts provided by the mod Blue Dog Design Bureau. In addition, while we're on our way to the moon, we're going to talk about some things we want to look for in the ideal site for building our base with the USI colonization mod. Alright, and we're just lifting off here. Blue Dog Design Bureau, they produce pretty much all the parts you see in this Apollo, Kerbalized Apollo model. There's only a handful of science parts I think I used that were part of the original game. It comes with those 3 big fuel tanks you'll see, the fantastic payload adapter that holds the lunar module. It's one of the best ones I've used so far out of all the mods I've tried, as well as all these really nice engines that come along with it. So the overall goal of this episode is going to be to talk about 3 things. We're going to do an overview of the USI or Umbra Space Industries life support. We're going to go over what resources we're going to need in order to make our base self-sustaining on the moon as far as giving itself its own life support. And we're going to look at some other factors you want to look at when picking a base location on the moon, such as like flatness, if you don't want to land in a mountainous area, or locations that have ease of getting back into a certain kind of orbit. And we'll also be gathering some science, because this is a science playthrough. Alright, and I'll just be speeding through some of these sequences just so we can speed things along. So the first bit of we're going to talk about is the USI life support. It's one of the simpler life support mods out there, and as far as all the things you need to keep your Kerbals alive. There's 3 main things that'll limit how long they can be in space or away from Kerbin. Those are supplies, which is just a general all-encompassing consumable. Your Kerbals will consume supplies and produce mulch, which mulch you can either discard or you can recycle using some other parts that come with the mod, with the addition of fertilizer. You need electric charge, so your vessel will need a way to replenish this electric charge, or else your Kerbals will be lost without it. And there's also the hab time limitation, which that does is it's pretty much your Kerbals will get claustrophobic or homesick after a certain amount of time, and they'll either need a very large vessel to stay out a long time, or you'll need to work in a way to rehabilitate them out in space. That's one of the more difficult ones if you're actually using this in a career playthrough. I'm going to be doing more on that later. For now, I have it disabled because early in game it's very difficult to pull off missions like this Apollo-style mission with the hab time fully enabled. There are a handful of parts that come with the USI life support that extend your supply of supplies. The first being recyclers. Those just simply limit the amount of supplies your Kerbals use for a given unit of time. Generally, it's by 60% or so, so you can stretch your supplies by that much more by including enough recyclers. Those recyclers do consume electric charge, so you just have to make sure that you're not going to overwhelm the solar panels or other generators you have on the vessel. The other is a converter using agroponics. So when Kerbals consume supplies, they produce mulch, which if you have a converter on the vessel, you combine that with fertilizer, and it will use electric charge to turn that mulch back into supplies at a slightly less than 1-to-1 ratio. So that'll extend your supplies for even further on longer voyages or on a colony. And just after we finish that little course correction maneuver, we're doing the transposition and docking, deploying our payload adapter, which I really like in this game. There's a little hidden attachment node inside the engine for this particular command service module that allows it to grab right on. You don't need to use any decouplers that make it wonky or get parts in the way of you trying to turn around and dock. I did cheat a little and use the MechJeb autopiloting and auto docking features for a lot of this video, just because it made me get through it a little bit quicker. All right, in order to make supplies once you've landed your base somewhere, and we'll go over the actual parts you'll need to use to manufacture supplies. You'll need to pick a landing site that has the correct resources in order for you to make those supplies efficiently. In our last episode, we looked at using ScanSat to make these awesome maps, which I'll pull up right here. These are resource maps, all of the moon, and all with resources that we'll need to make supplies. There's 4 different resources listed here, and we need different combinations of them to make. We can use different combinations to make supplies. The 4 are the S in the upper left there is substrate. The G in the upper right is gypsum. The W in the bottom left is water. And the H in the bottom right is hydrates. Hydrates you will use if you land in a spot that doesn't have water. You can produce water from hydrates. Substrate is one of the main things you need to make supplies. Gypsum, you need that to manufacture fertilizer, which you need to make supplies. And then water hydrates is another thing you need. And our landing site today is going to be in the northern poles area, almost directly where I placed the letters on this map. So it's one of the few locations on the moon where we have all 4 of our needed resources, or at least 3 out of the 4, in one location. That's the advantage of landing up there. The disadvantage is that it's a very mountainous region, so finding a nice flat area to safely build a base is going to be a little bit challenging. And getting into equatorial orbits for doing supply missions is going to cost a little bit more in fuel. So if you're putting things into orbit to refuel passing ships, it's going to be more efficient for them to meet up in an equatorial orbit. It's going to cost a little bit more fuel from your supply ship or your passing ship to get into a polar orbit to grab supplies from there. So it's a little bit of a trade-off either way, but today we're going to be exploring that polar region. All right, just doing our lunar orbit injection burn right now, decelerating into lunar orbit. You can see the image is a little dark, but I'll try to brighten that up some. The awesome model provided by Blue Dog Design Bureau for the command service module and the Munar lander. Really awesome detailed models with really cool textures. Still like it better than the Making History expansion parts that added some into the stock game, but these are just really nice looking and very functional. All right, now you can see we're just separating the lunar or Munar module. I'm going to go in for our landing, just selecting our landing site there. This is actually, I was mistaken earlier. It's not the polar region. It's in I believe it's the polar crater. So a lot of similar resources to you'll find on the poles, just slightly lower concentrations and slightly less mountainous. So we're just going to go ahead and warp through the landing there, do our plane change burn, and then an initial deceleration burn. And just more good things to say about Blue Dog Design Bureau's look of their lunar lander. I really like it, how well everything is done. You can see on the sides in some of these shots, I do have some additional Kerbal inventory system lockers stored, for which I will show you their purpose in just a moment, as well as I added some additional lighting to it so you could see how good it looked in kind of this darker area of the moon. You'll notice it's got the animated antennas there that I extended just a moment ago. Yeah, so the one light above the doorway is the original light that comes with it, as well as in the windows. And I added the other lights around the sides there and underneath the descent stage. So just coming in for a landing here and touching down. And before we get our Kerbals out to do some exploring, I have another little surprise for them, or well, they probably knew it happened, but it's a surprise for the rest of you. And just doing our surface resource analysis so we can get the exact composition of the things we will need. This gives you a little bit more detail than doing the orbital scans. the orbital scans give you like an average resource density for that given biome, and when you do your on-the-ground high resolution scan, it gives you the exact resources in that spot. All right, and here is our little exploration extras as I'm landing a rover using a sky crane type thing. Both the rover parts and the sky crane are from the USI exploration pack. I think the sky crane's from the colonization systems. It's to help you in landing your base modules, but just coming in, I tried probably half a dozen different ways to try to package the rover in with the lunar lander so it could be more Apollo style, even putting all the parts into KISS, Kerbal Inventory System containers, and assembling them on the moon. It was just too buggy and wonky for me to get it to work, and I just couldn't get it right trying to attach it somewhere externally on the lander. It was just too large. So I put it into orbit separately, and we're just going ahead and landing it here right next to our already landed Munar module. All right, so just bringing our rover in for a landing here, and then we will decouple the sky crane. It's got a little decoupler on the top, and then just park our sky crane nearby. Those will be useful to hold on to and not immediately just destroy or crash, because as we land other parts of our base, if it ends up being here, we can disassemble that sky crane and turn it into material kits, which is a resource used by MKS that lets us deploy base sections and manufacture things and build things. So it'll be useful just to have it stick around for now. I didn't do the smart thing and put a docking point underneath it so I could use it to snatch up modules and tow cargo around, but it'll be useful for other things. We'll go ahead and get, I believe it's Jeb out, get him in the rover, and pull it over here. The rover has its own KISS storage in it as well. We'll be using that to transport some science equipment to a suitable location at our landing site here. All right, you'll see me getting into the seat there. These external command seats are a little bit funny in the way you have to get out. They kind of chuck you up into the air when you get out of them. Can lead to some Kraken bugs where everything just kind of flies apart, but generally this little rover works pretty well. The parts you'll see me collecting here in a moment are from the mod Surface Experiment Pack, which allows you to deploy experiments that take usually around an in-game month or so to run in these little automated kind of probe core kind of things that will collect and transmit the data back to Kerbin when the experiments are finished. They're modeled after real-life experiments done by the Apollo missions with their surface experiment packages. So you'll see me just kind of moving all those modules over into the rover so we can bring them someplace where nice and flat and it gets good sunlight for the solar panels. You'll see I attached that extra science camera to the top there that comes with the USI exploration pack, which has that rover in it. Just another science collecting thing you can put on top there, and it collects pictures for you. I stored it inside the KISS container and just attached it afterwards so we could have the sky crane on top. So now we've found our nice flat location, so we'll go ahead and start putting together our surface experiment package. All right, so we'll just begin setting up our surface experiment package here. There is I believe there's about 8 or 9 new unique science parts, as well as the base station and some solar panel parts. You'll see me placing the base station there. Pretty much it's a plug-and-play type thing. It does require a Kerbal Inventory System and attachment system in order to put this all together. The base station there has an antenna and some solar panels. The antenna isn't the strongest one, so you'll need to make sure you have at least a couple of probes in orbit that have some relay capability just in case you aren't pointing in the quite right direction from the surface. So just deploying the solar panels there, they just snap right onto the top of that little tower. and just collecting a few of our connector parts. So if you've done any linking of struts or fuel lines with Kerbal attachment system before, this will be pretty familiar with how it works. You place these little attachment hubs down. You have to place little connectors on them and then link them to your experiments once you have your experiments placed on the ground. Seems to work really well with just connecting it to the ground. I know usually with a Kerbal attachment system, you'll sometimes want to use an attachment pylon or something on the ground just to avoid any bugginess. I have had a couple instances where things clip through the ground and explode, but it's pretty rare. So it seems to be work pretty well, just attaching right to the bare ground there. So just getting our power couplings all set up. So you'll see that first one is a power splitter, as well as being has a little extra battery storage in it, and the last one at the end there is just a splitter. All right, just jumping ahead a little bit to the placement of some of these science experiments here. So once you have them all linked together, you'll have to calibrate them. A scientist or engineer can calibrate them. A scientist is going to give you the highest level of calibration, and that affects how much science points you get in return. So the more calibrated the experiment is, the more science you'll get when it is completed. So just placing the last few modules here and linking them all together, you'll see me go through and calibrate all of them, and then you just activate the experiments from the central hub there, and when they are completed, they'll automatically be transported back via the DSN to Kerbin, where you'll get science points. And there is no transmission penalty when you go ahead and have this turn the auto transmitter on for this, so you won't lose out by just having it transmit the science when it's done. You can also turn the auto transmitter off and go ahead and collect the science by hand, either by deploying this at a base where you can stay for a long period of time. Most of the experiments take about 30 days to run, but there is some variation. You can also collect it and put it into a science lab if you have a base with a science lab to kind of maximize all your science. It's a nice little fun thing. It kind of gives another point to your EVAs when you visit planetary bodies. You set up these little science bases and get some extra science points. We're almost finished up here. We're going to go ahead and have Jebediah take a flying leap out of his seat, and we're going to plant a flag so we can target this area to potentially build a base at. We still have a couple other sites to investigate. I'll probably do those on my own and won't record them. But this site does have all the resources we need. They're in relatively low concentration, but they are there, so we won't have to do any extra conversion steps or anything like that, or use a sifter to pull it out of dirt. The things that difficult about this site is that it's pretty far north near the pole, so it may cost a little bit of extra delta V to get to and from if we're going to be trying to supply passing ships or getting things into orbit, as well as sunlight may be a bit difficult if we want to use solar power. You'll see that this is about as bright as it's going to get up here with the very glancing sunlight, so we may have to build a couple of solar masts or rely on nuclear power. Our Munar lander module, where we're going to collect all of our science that we got out on our short little rover journey, and then go ahead and board back up. There is just one little wonky thing about the Munar module by Blue Dog Design Bureau, is that the alignment to board versus the ladder is a little bit wonky, as you'll see me here tumbling and falling around trying to get in. I think I may be able to tweak that by changing the height at which the top part is attached to the descent stage. But it can be a little finicky as you're trying to get your Kerbals back inside. You can't just climb them up the ladder and hop in, because it's a little bit of a offset versus the top of the ladder. And when you board, as you see there, I did the same thing, just conked my head and fell back down. We'll get it eventually, and there we are. So everyone's back on board, and we're going to get ready for our return trip to Kerbin. And unfortunately, my recording did drop out just at the moment I left off, but it caught up just about here. You can see we're just getting into circularizing our orbit back around the moon, and we'll be setting up a rendezvous with the orbiting command module. I did goof a little bit and missed our rendezvous, so we had to burn an extra Delta V to get a rendezvous set up, but as you'll see in a couple moments here, that I had enough, even though I used a little bit of monopropellant to finish off our intercept burn. So just skipping through a bunch of our maneuvers I did to get us back in an intercept, I actually had to do a couple maneuvers with the command service module to get the final intercept because I ran out of fuel on the ascent module. We'll go ahead and everything's all set up here. We'll go ahead and move for docking and transfer our crew and science back over. And just coming in for the final dock here, this nice, beautiful cinematic shot coming up right in just a moment here of those two modules coming together. It really makes downloading this mod pack all worth it, so you can pull off scenes like this. Really looks amazing, and especially if you're a huge Apollo nerd, it's really fun to play with. So once we get everything docked, we'll transfer our crew back over and do our escape burn back to Kerbin. Alright, I'm cutting some out for the sake of time, but we're going to jump to the end of our escape burn here, returning to Kerbin, and we're going to cut right to our re-entry into the atmosphere. Just another couple things about the mods I have installed. The visual overhaul mods I think I mentioned in the last episode are the Astronomer's Visual Pack, along with Eve and Scatterer. They all work together. Eve adds a lot of those clouds and lightning effects you see. I think the lightning's a little bit too frenzied and active, but I'll see if there's a setting to alter that. And then Scatterer does the nice lighting effects. In the next episode of our series, we're going to be going over building the base, what parts you'll need to convert your resources into supplies, and then how to get those base modules into orbit. We'll probably cover deploying them and landing them and that kind of thing in a even more further episode. In the future, I'll try to keep these under 20 minutes. This one ran a little bit long, and I had to speed up a lot of the things, but that was just a lot to cover. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any suggestions for me, I'm just getting new to this uploading video game stuff to YouTube thing, so I'm a little awkward and still trying to figure out how to use my editing software and recording software. So if you guys have any feedback, it'd be awesome if you would let me know. And thanks for watching again, and I will see you guys in a further episode.